Letters to my future self. Part 1. The box in the basement. The basement was colder than I remembered. Not the kind of cold that made you shiver, but the kind that crept into your skin, stayed there, and whispered memories you thought you buried. The light bulb flickered once, twice, before settling into a weak amber glow that barely reached the far wall. I hadn't been down here in years, not since Mom sold the house to me after Dad passed. Most of the boxes were untouched, still labeled in her neat handwriting. Christmas decorations, old photo albums, kitchen stuff, fragile. And then there was one box shoved deep into the corner without a label, coated in a stubborn layer of dust. I almost didn't notice it, but as I moved aside a stack of yellowing newspapers, I saw the corner of faded cardboard, the edges softened by time. My name was written on the top, in a handwriting I recognized instantly, my own, but from decades ago. 1998, I whispered aloud, the year I turned 12. The tape was brittle and cracked. It peeled away with a sound like dry leaves. Inside, I found stacks of envelopes, each one marked in the same childish scrawl. To my future self. I sat on the concrete floor, cross-legged like a kid again, and picked one at random. The paper was soft from age, the ink slightly smudged, but the words were still clear. Hi, I hope you're doing awesome. I hope you're an astronaut or a rock star or maybe a writer. I hope you're married and have 2 kids and a dog. I hope you're still friends with Ethan and Lucas. I hope you're happy. I read it twice. My heart tightened. I wasn't an astronaut or a rock star or even much of a writer anymore. Ethan and Lucas, we hadn't spoken in over 15 years, and happy, well, that was complicated. I put the letter down, reached for another. If you're reading this, you must be at least 25. That's so old. Do you still draw? Do you still ride your bike to the lake in summer? Please tell me you didn't turn boring. I laughed, but it wasn't a real laugh. More like an exhale that hurt on the way out. I stayed there for over an hour, reading letter after letter. The kid who wrote them was hopeful, funny, fearless. I envied him. Somewhere between rent payments, endless emails, and failed relationships, I'd misplaced that version of myself. By the time I reached the last envelope in the box, the basement felt even colder. This one was different, the handwriting more careful, the envelope heavier. Across the front, in large letters, it read, "Open only when you've lost your way." I didn't open it. Not yet. I wasn't sure if I was ready to hear what 12-year-old me had to say about this version of me. But that night, lying awake in bed, I couldn't stop thinking about it. About him, about me, about how far apart we drifted. And that's when it hit me. Maybe these letters weren't just relics. Maybe they were a map back to something I'd lost. Part 2, the first step backward. The next morning, I made coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and stared at the unopened, lost your way envelope. My finger traced the edges, feeling the paper fibers, the weight of it. I wanted to open it. I also didn't. Instead, I went back to the basement and picked 3 letters from random years. The first one talked about my dream of visiting Paris because of the Eiffel Tower and all the bread. The second reminded me of my old habit of keeping a lucky marble in my pocket during tests. The third said I wanted to start a treehouse club with Ethan and Lucas. I thought about calling Ethan, but the truth was the last time we spoke, it ended in shouting. Lucas had moved 2 states away. Life had happened. Bridges had burned. But the 12-year-old in those letters didn't believe in too late. He believed in bike rides to the lake, in treehouse meetings, in friendship that lasted forever. So I did something I hadn't done in years. I got on my bike. It wasn't the same bike, of course. That one had rusted away in Dad's shed long ago. But I pedaled down the same streets, past the same houses, until the air smelled like the lake. When I got there, I found the old wooden dock. The boards creaked under my weight. I sat at the edge, shoes dangling over the water, watching sunlight dance on the ripples. And for the first time in a long time, I felt still. Part 3, Ghosts on the Dock. The lake had barely changed. The trees still leaned over the water like they were eavesdropping on secrets, their roots clutching at the shore. A faint breeze carried the smell of wet pine and something else, that faint metallic scent of summer water, the same one from my childhood. I closed my eyes, and it was like stepping backward in time. I could almost hear the slap of Ethan's bare feet against the dock, the splash as Lucas cannonballed into the water, the three of us laughing so hard our ribs hurt. But then another sound broke through the memory, footsteps on the dock behind me. I turned, half expecting to see some stranger out for a morning walk. Instead, I froze. Ethan. He looked older, of course. A little heavier, hairline retreating, but still unmistakably him. His eyes widened when he saw me. "Wow," he said slowly. "Didn't think I'd see you here." We stood there for a beat too long, the weight of 15 years pressing down on both of us. The last time we'd spoken, it had been a screaming match over something stupid, though, at the time, it felt like the end of the world. "I found some letters," I blurted out. "Ones I wrote to myself when we were kids. They mentioned you." He gave a small, humorless laugh. "Hopefully the good kind." "They were," I said quietly. "The best kind." We sat on the edge of the dock, feet dangling over the water like nothing had changed, though, of course, everything had. For a while, we didn't talk about the fight. We didn't talk about the years in between. Instead, we talked about the time Lucas swore he saw a ghost in the woods, about the time we tried to camp overnight and ended up running home at 2 a.m. because we heard bare noises that were actually just raccoons. Somewhere in there, the silence between us softened. Then Ethan said, "You know Lucas moved back last year, right?" I blinked. "No, I didn't." "Yeah, runs a garage over on Main Street. He's not the same either. None of us are." Ethan paused. "But maybe that's okay." Part 4, the call I didn't want to make. That night, I sat in my car outside the garage for 20 minutes before I actually went in. The smell of motor oil hit me immediately, and then I heard his voice. "Be right with you." Lucas stepped out from behind a car, wiping grease from his hands with a rag. When he saw me, he froze. The rag slipped from his fingers. "Well," he said slowly, "if it isn't the ghost of summers past." I laughed nervously. "Yeah, guess I'm haunting you now." We didn't hug. We didn't shake hands. We just stood there, studying each other like we were looking for signs of the kids we used to be. "I ran into Ethan," I said finally. "Yeah," his expression shifted, cautious but curious. "We were talking about us, about when things were good." Lucas didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached into his back pocket and pulled out something small, a marble, cloudy blue with a swirl of white. "I found this when I was moving last year," he said, holding it out. "Didn't even remember I still had it. You used to carry it for luck." I took it, feeling the weight of it in my palm. It was nothing, just glass, but it felt heavier than anything I'd held in years. And that's when I knew. The letters weren't just nostalgia, they were instructions. Part 5, the truth in the old stained office. Lucas's garage had a small back office, barely big enough for a desk, a filing cabinet, and 2 mismatched chairs. The smell of gasoline and coffee lived permanently in the air. We sat across from each other, the marble still in my hand. Lucas watched me turn it over, the glass catching the afternoon light. "I never told you," he said suddenly, voice quieter now, "why I really stopped talking to you." I looked up confused. "We had a fight." "That wasn't it," he cut in. "The fight was just the surface. The truth is, back in senior year, Ethan told me something. Said you didn't want me around anymore. Said you thought I was holding you back." My stomach dropped. "That's not true." "I know that now," he said, eyes narrowing slightly. "But back then, I believed him. You two were hanging out without me more, and every time I called, you were busy. I figured you outgrown me." I leaned back, trying to process. "Ethan told you that?" Lucas nodded slowly. "I think he was jealous. Thought if I was gone, you and he would be like when we were kids. He never realized it killed both of us in different ways." I sat there, stunned. 15 years of distance, of awkward silences and swallowed apologies, and it all started with one stupid, whispered lie. "Why didn't you just ask me?" I asked. He looked down at his hands, grease still under his fingernails. Because I didn't think I'd like the answer. We sat in silence for a long moment. The hum of the fluorescent light above us was the only sound. Finally, Lucas said, "So what now?" Part 6, the letter calls me. I drove home with my mind spinning. My childhood friendships had been shattered by a truth I hadn't even known existed. All the years I'd blamed myself for not trying harder, all the guilt I'd carried, it had been built on a false foundation. When I got home, I didn't even take off my jacket. I went straight to the basement, to the box, to the envelope that had been haunting me for days. Open only when you've lost your way. I sat at the kitchen table, the paper trembling slightly in my hands. My heart was beating too fast. I thought about the 12-year-old boy who had written it, probably sitting on his bedroom floor with a pencil, tongue sticking out in concentration. I tore it open. Inside was a folded sheet of lined notebook paper, the kind with the blue and red margins. "Dear future me," it began. "If you're opening this, I guess something went wrong. I want you to remember 3 things. 1, you're braver than you think. 2, you don't have to do everything alone. 3, the people who matter most are the ones you'd miss if they were gone. Go find them, fix it, don't wait." I read it again, and somewhere in the middle of the 3rd read, I started to cry quietly, the way you cry when the truth hurts more than you expected but also feels like a relief. The letter didn't tell me what to do next, but it didn't have to. I knew. Part 7, the lie behind the lie. I called Ethan the next morning. His voice on the phone was wary, like he'd been expecting this call for years. "Can we talk?" I asked. "About?" "Lucas and about us." There was a pause, then "Meet me at the park, noon." The park was nearly empty when I got there. The swings creaked in the wind, and the picnic tables looked smaller than I remembered, the way everything from childhood does when you see it as an adult. Ethan was already there, sitting on the bench where we used to eat popsicles after biking all afternoon. I sat down across from him. For a moment, neither of us spoke. "I talked to Lucas," I said finally. "He told me about what you said back in high school, that I didn't want him around anymore." Ethan stared at the ground. His jaw tightened. "Why?" I asked. "Why would you say that?" He didn't answer right away. When he finally looked up, there was something in his eyes I hadn't expected, not anger, not guilt, but shame. "I thought I was protecting you," he said. "From what?" "From him." Ethan ran a hand through his hair, exhaling hard. "You didn't know this, but back then, Lucas was in trouble. His brother owed some guys a lot of money. The kind of people you don't want to owe anything to. Lucas was getting dragged into it, skipping school, hanging out with them. I thought if you stayed close, you'd get pulled in too." I froze. "So you lied to both of us?" "I didn't think it would be forever," he said quickly. "I thought you'd reconnect later after it all blew over, but then life happened, and it didn't blow over." The air between us felt heavier now. My anger was tangled up with something else, confusion, pity, the sour taste of missed chances. "You could have just told me," I said. He shook his head. "I was 17. I thought I was doing the right thing." Part 8, the hardest thing. That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind kept replaying the new version of the past I'd just been handed. All those years, I'd seen Ethan as the villain, Lucas as the friend I lost, and myself as the guy who let it all fall apart. Now it wasn't that simple. Ethan had lied, yes, but not out of malice. Lucas had been in a place I never knew about. And me, I'd built my whole idea of failure on a story that was never fully true. The letters in the basement had started as a curiosity, a nostalgic detour. But now they were something else. They were a mirror, forcing me to see the gaps between the boy I was and the man I'd become. And maybe, just maybe, I still had time to close that gap. The next morning, I texted both Ethan and Lucas. "Meet at the lake, noon, no excuses." When they both showed up, they kept their distance at first, the way people do when there's still too much unsaid. But I pulled the marble from my pocket and held it out between them. "This," I said, "was ours. and I'm done letting old lies decide who we are now. It wasn't some magic movie moment where everything healed instantly, but they both nodded. And for the first time in years, we stood together on the same dock, looking out at the same water. Part 9, the last letter. A week after that day at the lake, I went back to the basement. The box was still there, its contents lighter now that I'd read most of the letters, but one envelope remained buried at the bottom. It was smaller than the others, just a folded scrap of paper taped shut. Across the front, in blocky pencil letters, it read, "Read this when you've done what you were afraid to do." I smiled to myself. 12-year-old me had an annoying way of knowing things before I did. I tore it open. "Hey, future me," it began. "If you actually did the thing you were scared of, whatever it was, I'm proud of you. Even if it didn't work out, even if it was messy, because it means you didn't give up. It means you're still the kind of person I wanted to be." I set the paper down and let the words soak in. The truth was, doing the thing wasn't one moment. It wasn't just meeting Ethan and Lucas at the lake. It was the 100 little steps before and after the bike ride to the dock, the awkward hellos, the hard questions, the forgiveness that didn't come easy. And now, there was one more step I needed to take. Part 10, Paris at last. When I was 12, I'd written in more than one letter that I wanted to go to Paris. Not for romance or fashion or art, but for bread. Specifically, the best bread in the world. Life had made it seem like a silly dream, the kind you laugh about later. But sitting there with that last letter, I realized something. I didn't have to laugh it off. I could still go. 2 months later, I was standing on a quiet Paris street at sunrise, the air cool and smelling faintly of coffee. I walked into a little bakery I'd found by accident. The woman behind the counter handed me a warm baguette wrapped in brown paper. I stepped outside, tore off a piece and bit into it. Crisp crust, soft center, steam rising into the morning air. It wasn't just bread. It was proof that the boy in those letters had been right about more than I'd given him credit for. Part 11, coming home. When I got back, Ethan and Lucas were waiting for me at the lake. I brought them each a small paper bag from the bakery. Inside were baguettes, still warm. We sat on the dock, breaking bread like we used to break candy bars as kids, passing pieces back and forth. The sun dipped low over the water, the ripples catching fire in the light. "Guess you finally did it," Lucas said with a grin. "Guess I did," I replied. We didn't talk about the years we'd lost. We didn't need to. The lake, the dock, the bread, it was enough. Epilogue, the man I wanted to be. That night, I put the letters back in the box and slid it under my bed instead of the basement. Not because I needed them every day, but because I wanted them close. They weren't a record of who I had been. They were a reminder of who I could still be. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I'd lost my way. I felt like I was still walking toward the boy who wrote them, and maybe, finally, he'd be proud to meet me.